Okay, we're getting near the end on our checklists. So final module I'm going to do is a data analysis and visualizations module to report on the data. So I'll try and put it all into this one video. It's probably going to take me about 1 or 2 weeks to get it all done. So immediately after this I'll just go through what my current design ideas are, and then I'll show you how I implement any changes I made along the way and the resulting data analysis module. And this is the way I'm thinking of approaching it. So first, I'm thinking I need some sort of denormalization. So a way of taking my checklists and checklist items, being able to select certain ones and then put it all into one big object of checklists and checklist items where everything's denormalized. So for data analysis, I'm going to have to denormalize all the document references anyway, so better just to do it up front and have one routine that's going to do the filtering, one page and routine that does the filtering and denormalization. So I want to be able to select checklists probably by team, by category, probably by a date range. And I'm doing these analysis, and definitely by template. So I might want to see all the checklists that were performed using a certain template, say requirements management template, and be able to do analysis on all those across various teams or within a specific team over a date range. So I think the output for this will be something like a checklists array, and in that it'll contain denormalized checklists, and probably for things like the denormalized checklists, I'll actually create another interface in the checklist model to define the denormalized checklists, and inside the checklist will be all the fields as well as an array of checklist items. And same story there, that will be denormalized checklist items, so I'll probably define an interface for that in the checklist items model. And by having this all in one large object, it will make the processing that I do after this a lot easier to do. So the second thing is I'm going to need some sort of scoring or stats generator, so maybe I'll call it a score generator. And I'm expecting to take the object that was created here, so the process would be we select what checklists we're interested in, denormalize them, pass that on to the score generator, and that produces scores on those checklists. So I'm thinking of things being able to roll up all the checklist items on a checklist and get a score of, say, how many were completed, or what's the score based on the ratings for people entered against those checklist items. And I see that creating some sort of score object. And also have it be able to go, say, within the checklist items on a checklist, and those checklist items are also grouped by things like activities, so you can score across all the similar activities. And also we have tag ID on individual checklist items that were generated from a template, so there might be a specific checklist item that says something like has documented the requirements for a requirements checklist, and just being able to get a score across all those items and different checklists that have that same tag. So that's what the score generator is going to be doing. And then the third part of this is really the output from the whole process, and I see two types of output. So there's going to be the straight extract, so something that will just dump this information, probably that and that, or maybe you select one or the other. You want a summarized score view or the raw view. and extract it just as a JSON object for being able to, or JSON file that can then be brought into something like Microsoft's BI, TIBCO's Spotfire. There's a whole lot of analytic tools, maybe even Excel. So all sorts of different ways of analyzing JSON data once you've extracted it as such. And also on the actual application, I want to do a few pages for visualizations, or at least for common visualizations. So things like being able to see trends and scores over time. So is a team, or across all the teams, are we seeing the scores for something like requirements management again improving over time? Also be able to do visualizations on activities and individual tagged items, and maybe just getting a summary, say by team, by even by template, or some other high level property of the checklist, and maybe show that as a bar chart or something like that. So maybe that's some sort of tag ID. Activity visualization. There wouldn't be too many of these visualizations, only ones that I think are going to be common things that the user would do. Otherwise, I'd say leave it to being able to extract the data, and then you've got full control over the type of analysis that you want to do on the data. So as long as you have a way of getting the denormalized data out of the system, filtered in some way, and then bring it into external tools, that's probably going to end up being more flexible in the end.
Okay, this is about a week later, so I've got things this far. So I've got a data extract component, and I've got a selection component on it, so I can do things like create an extract and click on the downloaded extract, and I get all the data for the checklists and checklist items selected, extracted in one file, one JSON file. So that's kind of what the extract was meant to do. So some of the challenges I had along the way. So the first ones to look at is to get all the denormalizations, all the lookups, and in the Firebase database to happen at once. So I started using a lot of async. So on that button that said extract, extract the JSON, I set that up as an async function, and then I've got where it's actually getting the data, so it puts together a checklist observable based on the search, and then it's doing awaits on getting the actual checklists and denormalizing the checklist. So what I did was, as each checklist is retrieved from the observable, it uses the store normalize function to create a new checklist extract class for each checklist, and that's defined in this checklist extract model. So I created an actual separate model to hold the version of checklist and checklist items that's going to be used for the extract, because some of the fields, I didn't extract all the fields. Things like resources wasn't really needed in an extract for doing data modeling, data analysis, so I didn't pull that. And then some things needed conversions, then I needed to also denormalize things like all the checklist items under a checklist. So you see there's a different version of the checklist and checklist items in this checklist extract model. So that's being used during that denormalization of the checklist, and using an async await. And then once I've got all the checklists pulled, so after all the awaits, and I've got a array of checklists, then it goes in to explode the checklist items under the checklist. And there was one weird piece under here where I had to use an await and use a promise all during a map, because a map creates multiple promises on whatever its array entries it's mapping. So I had to use a promise all to pull all those together into one await and get this waiting until all that data is retrieved before going on to the next statement here. And that's basically it for getting all the data. Some of the other things I had to do is I realized as I went along that instead of the date fields being returned from the database being dates, which I kind of knew already, I should have defined them as timestamps. So then I can do to date based on those dates being declared as timestamps. So I'm doing that in the code. We can see that in the denormalized function. So for example, down here, if there's a date, it reads the, in this case, date created as a Firestore timestamp, and then it can do a to date on that when it's converting it to the denormalized version. So I had to do that through all the documents I'd modeled to make sure dates was converted to timestamps to make that all work. So another weird thing I ran into was is the way Firestore caching works when I do two queries on the same collection of documents. So again, you see here in my data extract page, I have the various main categories of things to search on pre-filled, and I wanted to pre-fill a list of templates as well, so I wanted to just another drop down here. So I tried to do that and found it wasn't working with the caching, so I had to convert this to dialog so it happens outside the component, which seems to be, so let's have a look. So init, on init, so that's where I pre-fill all the other things like categories and teams and activities into the search dialogues, but I ended up having to do the template just as a click on a template dialog button and then doing the old template dialog thing to bring up the dialog for the list of templates, so that the actual activity about getting the templates was happening outside my component. And took a while to debug this, but it seemed to be, if we have a look at the service for checklists, I was using find all templates to get the templates. So basically that's going over checklists and finding everywhere that is template is true and returning a collection of documents, checklist documents. So I was doing that in init, and then I was also trying to, later on in the search, to do this search function where it returns a list of checklist documents. But when I was doing that, if I do both in the same component, it seemed to do this search only over the list of templates that were returned in the init. So it seems to be doing some default caching where if you've retrieved a certain collection of documents once, then that's what it uses as its set of documents to do additional operations over, such as the search. So that was the reason why I had to pull the getting the list of templates out to a separate component, so the search was always working over the list of documents that were up in the database and not in the local cache. So just a gotcha. It took me a day or so to work out what was happening there and fix it up, but I don't know whether you'd run into that too often. It's really just because I'm using type to define different classes of checklist documents, so maybe kind of a unique thing to be doing. Okay, I think I have most of the checklist data analysis done. So I end up just having a single page that I'm using for data analysis made of two parts. So this part up here is where you select what you want to extract. So I'll click on Get Data, shows an example of that. It actually creates 3 downloadable files. One's a JSON file that, if we have a look at that, it has the selected checklist and checklist items as JSON. It also provides the same information as separate checklist and checklist item files which the checklist items has a link back to the checklist ID, and that's useful if you're using something like Excel. So if we look at downloading checklists, just brings it up as a CSV file, which brings up Excel. I can do some analysis in Excel, also bring it into other data analysis tools which use CSV files. Most of them use CSV files. And just to show the last one for checklist items, and big long list of checklist items, and the second field here is the one I was talking about, checklist ID. But I'll have a longer description of that in the help that goes along with the application. Also, when you do the get data, it also shows the initial visualization down the bottom. And at the moment it's shown the data I just extracted broken down by category and the average checklist score across all the checklists in that category. And the checklist score is based on either the true or false ratings or the actual ratings. There's some weighting given to all those to get an overall checklist score. So say on a checklist with just check marks on it, if you check everything, it's given a rating of 100%. If it has ratings on it, say you only give medium for everything, then it would end up with a score of 50%. Also, you can categorize by things like team or by status, and you can also look at, as well as overall score, you can have a look at the completeness, and the one other value you can get on is count. So that's a useful way of just getting in a quick look at all the checklists that you select and just getting counts, and in this case different statuses, but maybe in the team you want to see how many checklists are in each team, tied to each team, and you may just want to see active checklists tied to each team. So again, let's look at team counts, and we just see that the only checklists that are active are tied to the Angular team, and there's 3 of them. So that's the visualizations. I'll just show you one bit of code. So while I was working on this, I was playing around with dates. So one thing I ran into with dates, and let's have a look at checklist HTML here. So something I had to do, because checklist dates come back as being either a timestamp or a field value, because that's what they're declared as in the model. But anything coming back from Firestore will actually be a timestamp. This field value is only used for when inputting a date to get the server to set the date value. So, but it's coming back as these 2 possible values. So I was finding that when I look at just converting something like date completed to date, said it couldn't do a to date on if it was a field value. So what I had to do was write a little routine in down here. I called it to date. I don't know whether that's going to be confusing, but actually does the work of casting the timestamp that's returned as an actual timestamp, so I can then apply the to date. And the other thing I'm doing is putting it through the date pipe and showing it as a medium date format, so it just shows the date and time without the time zone when it displays it. So that's about it. I'll just show you, I've been tracking the work I'm doing on checklists in this checklist to-do list, and you see I've just done data analysis, add date setting code, so I've done that as well. So I'm really just running through these last few items here. Hopefully that's only going to take about a week to do now, so I've got to clean up comments and things, just clean up the code inside so it looks better. I'm going to update the Cypress tests. I need to add some about the actual functionality for creating checklists and things like that. I want to have that in the standard Cypress test suite as well. I need to look at the Firestore storage rules to make sure I've got rules where I want rules. I've got some rules in there, but I think I need to revisit some of the rules about who can do what to checklists. I need to create help and documentation. I'm only going to do that as a help video this time. I'm not going to write documentation for this one. I'm going to create some templates. So I'm going to create example templates, maybe around SEMA and maybe about boating as well. Just have some templates out there, create some actual checklists based on those templates. Maybe I should move that up before the help, and then use those example templates and examples of checklists created with those templates in the documentation. I also want to go through, and maybe I can roll this into cleanup comments and things, is to use the JavaScript documentation CompuDoc. So I want to put comments in where they need to be shown in the CompuDoc documentation, and then I'll go back and update FBM Starter.